Welcome back to TEYARA SMP, a TNP Limitless 7 series, and the keen-eyed amongst you may notice that we are not in fact on the server, we are in my creative test world, and this slightly contradicts what I said last episode about wanting to get back into building and survival, but it's for a good cause. I really wanted to finish building the mechanism specifically for my Nether portal, and let me tell you, I intended in the second half of this episode that we would be able to put this on the server and start doing some building in the rest of this room in survival mode, and unfortunately, between the number of retakes, I think we're up around 7 now. I've kind of lost count, and also the amount of time it will take me to get some of these resources, I figured it'd be better to just split this into 2 parts, one where I go over the actual mechanism mechanics, and as well as the aesthetics. And then next week, when I have the resources together, we'll put it on the server and maybe finish detailing this room, which should be a decent chunk of time anyway. First, let's start with the mechanics of the door itself. Let me pull up my super glue here. You can see that we have 2 contraptions, and sidestepping the hole that we'll talk about shortly, you can see that we have half of the door is assigned to the bottom and half of the door is assigned to the top. And we also, in the corners, have a pair of gantries per half. Now, the way that this door actually moves is this sequenced gear shift and the attached motor, which we'll get to shortly. Behind the sequence gear shift in the Z direction, we have a vertical gearbox, which means that this shaft turns opposite this shaft, and we have a couple of gantries down where we can't actually see them, but they start in the corner and go 4 blocks down because each half is 4 blocks tall. Simple. The sequence is, well, 4 blocks reverse, wait another pulse, and then 4 blocks forward. Now, you're probably thinking, where do we get the pulse from? These redstone links? Hole in the floor. Unfortunately, we are meant to have an entity detector right here. We used it in the episode with the Foundry Gate. I want to say that's 3 or 4 ago at this point in time. But we're going to have that set to detect players, and then we have a 4-tick delay so that if somebody is dancing on the edge of the area that I have set up, it won't repeatedly open and close the door, it'll just kind of wait a little bit before it does that. That could mean there's going to be some strange behaviors, but, well, it just means a little bit more dancing will fix it as well. So we have an observer hooked up to that, and on the other side, we have our link, and I have in fact tested that the link triggers when the observer is active, yada yada, all that works. Moving right along functionally, ignoring all of the aesthetic bits, we have the basic motor, which is from Create New Age. It requires electric power to make rotation, so we need electric power, which we're getting from this wire connector from Immersive Engineering. Following it back to its source, we're actually getting the power from these carbon brushes, which is attached to a generator coil, which is surrounded by magnetite blocks. And this is more or less how an actual motor or an electric power generator works in reality. I mean, it's a little bit simplified, but that's Minecraft logic for you. You basically spin a coil through a magnet and, well, it generates power. And of course, the opposite is true for a motor. You can spin, You can run the electricity through the coil in a magnetized block and that will make it spin. Yes, that's how that works. So basically, a similar kind of circuit can be used as either the generator or the motor, but not both, because it's basically the direction of stuff switches. You get the idea. That's your basic, very basic electronic physics for the day. That, in turn, is spun by this. But where are we actually getting our rotations? And that is this. So this is something that I've been thinking about ever since I saw a Reddit post by, and my apologies if I butcher this, user Varellin1989, and I'll theoretically link this in the description, where they had this really cool thing about making a horizontal windmill in order to power all of their stuff, but it looked more like a machine than a windmill. So when is a windmill not a windmill? When it's a component in a very big motor. And so you can see that we've got a whole bunch of gray wool. We also have some decorative framed extended panels, which is really neat. I've determined that these are now compatible with the schematic cannon in the version of Create we're using, so that saves me a lot more time, and I could have probably done that last episode as well with the sawmill time-lapse. Oops. And then we also have Create Copycat panels. Now these have a really cool property that if you use wool or any other kind of windmill compatible block in the Copycat panel, it will also generate stress units on the windmill. So this windmill ends up generating something like 2048 SU at 5 RPM or something like that, but 5 RPM is not fast enough for this generator coil, so we have to step up the RPM somehow. Which, you can see, we have large cogwheel. It is encased, which means that the top shaft does not actually go all the way through to this encased chain drive. This is a very necessary property, and we can't just use a gearbox here to take power out to the side and redirect it, because otherwise we'd have an exposed shaft. So we have the encased large cogwheel out here, which redirects it into this cogwheel here, into a chain drive, around the corner, into a large cogwheel, which is attached to a rotation speed controller, or actually, into the rotation speed controller, which is attached to the large cogwheel. Now, this generator coil has a multiplier of 24 stress units per RPM, or other way around, either way. That means that our maximum capacity of 2048 divided by 24 is theoretically the maximum limit of this coil, or how fast that we should be able to turn it. Experimentally, I've determined that, see that efficiency number up at the top? I think the real number is 24 times 1.67 rounding stuff. And so that means that we actually have to run it a little bit slower than I anticipated. I didn't want to actually do the maths for that, so I started with my theoretical maximum speed, which I believe was like 128 RPMs, and then I stepped it down to, say, 64. And then I stepped that down to 32, realized I could go a little bit faster, went up to 48, and that was a nice happy medium. It generates enough power to be able to turn this motor, and I've confirmed that the doors in fact work, but we're saving the animation for when it's actually on the server. So please look forward to that next week. Now, those of you that have made a Nether portal before in vanilla or modded may be aware that Zombified Piglins can spawn in the portal, and there are a couple of ways of dealing with this, one of which is you can just turn off the portal. However, due to aesthetics, I can't exactly hide that kind of a mechanism on the other side of the portal. We'll get to that in a little bit. That means that my portal has to be always on. So that means I have to find a way to deal with Zombified Piglins spawning in my portal. And that is powered by this. And we'll talk about some of the aesthetic details, but this pipe, narratively, is going to be spewing out some lava right here. And that is going to turn this large water wheel, which, through a convoluted series of chain drives, and some other redirection, comes back here, which powers this shaft, which you can see, entity detector. We've got a megatorch here for the aesthetic bits that I'm about to talk about. But unfortunately, it doesn't work on Zombified Piglins because they are not actually hostile. They are hostile when attacked, but otherwise they're peaceful, which means they can still spawn in the portal. So we have the entity detector, which will detect when they are in the portal, and that will reverse this gear shift. Now, when this is turning, by default, this slice is going to be pushed up by this piston. The only reason it's not right now is because obviously we don't have any lava pushing that water wheel, which is insane sounding, but that means that this isn't turning, which means that this isn't pushing, which means that it's in the downward position, because that's just easier for me to use the schematic cannon with in general. Now this is a slightly older version of the build than the one that I'm going to be putting on the server due to, well, just using copies of the world to update things, but that's fine. The gist of it's still the same. So, with this in the down position, and I think we're in normal, what's going to happen is the door is going to be up unless a human is about to use the portal. This is going to be part of simulated stained glass fog. For those of you who are not familiar with the effect, having stained glass separated by an air gap progressively makes whatever's behind it look both darker and also more colorful depending upon the stained glass you pick. So, in the final build, we have 2 red layers, a brown layer, 2 more red layers, and a purple layer. And if I have the presence of mind and remember to put this in, we are going to have a couple of screenshots edited in Paint where we can see that on the left is going to be the basic Nether fog, which is also true of the JMD Nether dimension, and on the right is going to be my portal stained glass. And although the numbers are not exactly the same, they are close enough that I think we can write this off as a success, considering I have no idea what I'm doing with regards to fog color blending, or how to calculate that for a more exact blend of colors. Back to the actual system itself. So normally this is going to be up, but when I place in a zombified piglin, we can really quickly see that this activates. So the gear shift will turn this down, and then the zombified piglin walks towards the turtle egg, because that's a vanilla Minecraft mechanic, and we also have these spruce trap doors, because in classic Minecraft fashion, the AI thinks that it can cross this gap, but the spruce trap doors are in the down position, so it walks into the hole and falls into these mob mashers from the mob grinding utils mod. Now, what these do is counts as a player kill when it does damage to the zombified piglin. And that means that we can get all sorts of special drops from it that, dealing with it any other way, we normally couldn't. And that means that we can also get XP from it, so we need to be able to collect both items and XP. Enter, from the same mod, the Absorption Hopper, and the one drawback to this is that it only outputs one type of item per direction. So you can see in the up direction we're outputting fluid for the liquid XP, and to the north, or in the negative Z direction, we have items. Now those are going into controller access points, which we'll talk about shortly, but I need a way to deal with the equipment that zombified piglins drop, specifically golden swords and crossbows. Here we have Smart Shoot set for those exact things and ignore data. And the interesting thing is, because Smart Shoots, and I guess the Absorption Hopper as well, are based on the Hopper code, and I've actually looked at this, hoppers will always pull from the block above them before they push to other blocks. And so that means that this Smart Shoot will always get equipment, or at least specifically golden swords and crossbows, and dispose of them into this item trash can before the Absorption Hopper has time to push them and potentially clog up my storage with a whole bunch of non-stackable items that I don't want. There are some non-stackable items that I do want, for instance, that ability totem you can see on the far right there, but we're going to go over that when we look at the storage itself. And speaking of that, let's pull out this linking tool. So you can see that our range extends all the way out here because you can upgrade the storage drawer itself, the controller range. Now back here at the actual drawers, you can see that we've got a little bit of an interesting setup. So we have the controller in the middle, we have a triple compacting drawer for the gold nuggets that we're going to get off the zombified piglins, and I figured this is going to make storage easier, especially if we want to take stuff out for builds, or even just crafting. It'd be nice to have access to both ingots and gold blocks at the same time. We also get, as common drops, fire shards, and these only have 2 stages, so 9 of these is one of these. and same with the Inferium Essence, so that's why we have some of these compacting drawers. Now they are framed compacting drawers because there don't exist a mangrove version of this by default, and the way I did this was by taking the mangrove 2x1 drawers and crafting it with the framed simple compacting drawer. And then as the third customization block, I also used just a mangrove log, because otherwise by default this bar across the middle would be the same red as, well, the rest of the drawer. And this makes it look more like it was intentionally, well, supposed to be like this. I mean, if we just take a look at the 2x2 drawers, I mean, I think I've done a pretty good job at disguising the fact that this doesn't normally exist. On the left here, we also have Zombie Hearts, Rotten Flesh, and on the bottom, XP drawer, or fluid drawer specifically. All of the capacity of these can be upgraded, so that means that we've got a ton of storage, and this is also the first case where I'm storing XP. I might refactor the skeleton farm later to have this as well, but for now, this is perfectly fine by me. We also have a couple of 2x2 drawers up top for things like ability totems, which, although rare, can still happen. And I think we might be able to get bundles and backpacks off of these guys too, potentially. So I'm hoping we get some of that in there. Now, across to the other side, currently I'm just mirroring everything. And what I'd originally intended to do is that when this fills up on the other side, that's it. And then on this side, we'd have, a number of storage upgrades, but then the last upgrade would be a void upgrade. So that way, we can start voiding excess stuff. But the more I think about it, what's actually going to happen is that once we run out of spaces for, the common items here, they're going to start flowing into these 2x2 drawers, and that is not really great, because we want to save them for things like ability totems, scrolls, things that I haven't anticipated, really. And so, what I might end up doing is put the voids on these after I've, maxed out their storage capacities, and then just convert all of these, or the remainder of these, I should say, into these 2x2 drawers. Although, the fluid drawer does not have this weakness because we're only storing one type of fluid, and so I think I might keep the other fluid drawer here as well. I'm on the fence about the gold, but that's going to be like the first thing to overflow. Actually, probably the last thing to overflow, just because it has to get up to gold blocks before it starts flowing over to this drawer. Anyway, I'm rambling. TLDR, there might be a refactor of the storage here at some point in the future. Now, for aesthetics, I don't quite remember the order, so things are going to be just a little bit rambly. But I know for a fact that I started with the door, and when I did that, I started with the outline specifically. I don't think I was using basalt originally. I think I'd just picked some other kind of metallic block, or metallic-ish block. Basalt is clearly a stone, but it's gray. It looks metally. It works with the rest of the build. But when I did that, and then I filled in the middle, and I think I was still using treated wood planks at the time, when the door opened, it looked very strange because it looked like a solid object was splitting in two. So I figured adding a visual divide across the middle would make the door look better. It would look like it can open, even though it's closed. And that's when I decided on polished basalt because, well, directionally, it has that sort of sharp line in the middle when we lay it out like this. So that was all well and good, and I framed everything out in the basalt, but it looked weird at the corners because either it was in the horizontal layout, where it just sort of disappeared into the frame and I didn't like not having the hard edge there, or we had it in the vertical layout and then we had the problem where it looked like one solid object, and I didn't like that for the door. So I figured let's look for a block that we can use as more or less a corner for the door as well. And it has to look, kind of a similar gray. It has to look heavy duty. Enter the block of industrial iron from Create. And I think this is going to be one of the slightly more expensive components on the server, but that's okay because I clearly like to suffer for aesthetics. That's fine. So once I did that, And I also elected to use some of these framed double stairs so that we can get a little bit of curvature on the top, because just a flat line looked weird as well. And I think this honestly has a great shape to the build that we couldn't otherwise do in vanilla. I mean, I know we're in modded and this is a create door, so of course it's not going to look very vanilla, but I mean, I think this just makes it look better, and we're leaning into the fact that we have access to those mods. So the next thing I started working on was the frame of the door. Now, I knew that I didn't just want to go with andesite, which is the reason that we're using some brass and also some copper, but the very first thing that I did was these pipes, and specifically the fluid pipe over the water wheel. It doesn't actually pipe anything out, so we're just going to be placing a bucket of lava right here, and that's what's going to turn the wheel. But the next thing is that the lava started to flow outward, and I didn't want that. I wanted it to flow straight down, and that causes a little bit of two-dimensionality down here, but I think I'm fine with that in terms of, how everything else is going. So I put this pipe in, which sort of snakes out and into the wall and doesn't actually do anything either, but it limits the flow of the lava. And so then, once I did that, I figured, okay, well, you know what, let's add in another pipe here. And then I thought, all right, well, let's put in some stuff up here. And I think at this point in time, I'd also put in this chute, which is serving to be sort of a large pipe, implying that we're piping stuff into the portal as well. Now, a little tip about this particular design, this is also directional. So if we put the chute like this, then looking in this direction, obviously it looks like the chute is flowing down and into the direction that we're facing. That's how I got this working. Unfortunately, when I tried to replicate that on the bottom originally, this is what happened. From this perspective, it looks like, despite the fact that, we're coming out of the wall, the diagonal is on the bottom side, not the top side. And in order to make this effect work, the diagonal would have to be on the top side as well, and it isn't. So that's why we only have one chute pipe in the build, and it's in from the top. And it still looks really good, if I do say so myself. So after I put in that, I decided, okay, one more pipe up here for good measure. We'll just have it coming out and sort of imply that it's feeding this archaic light, which at this point in time I'd put in, because after I'd framed everything out, I had the gap between the wall and the nether brick sort of lining or accent or support pillar or whatever you want to call it. And I was thinking to myself, I kind of know that this is going to be a dark build color palette wise. I don't want it to be a dark build lighting wise, despite the fact that we have a mega torch in the build, and therefore we don't need to worry about hostile mobs. So, because this is supposed to be a hybrid build between immersive engineering, which we have with both the power and also the treated wood planks here, create, which we have with both the rotational stuff and the door opening and a whole bunch of other elements that we'll get to as I get to it chronologically, I also wanted there to be an embers element of the build, and the very first embers element that I put in were these archaic lights, because I figured where else to put them but in the portal to the Nether. I mean, I think that just sort of fits the infernal aesthetic really well. And then I decided, let's frame that in with the archaic edges. But I couldn't just repeat that all the way up the pillar, so I decided, let's look for a pillar block that looks similar in color to these blocks here. Let's not exactly match it necessarily, but let's get in the same kind of family or ballpark. And that's when I hit upon cast iron pillar from Industrial Decor. Now, these are two different types of gray. And, I'm not formally trained in color theory or anything like that. I'm purely going off of what my eyeballs see. I'm not colorblind either, at least insofar as it's not a major one, if I do have one. But the point is, this and this are slightly different. I want to say this is almost like more purpley and this is more green, if that makes sense. They're both very gray, but they are close enough in the family that this almost sort of complements the archaic edge and the light. And the light even has like its own different shade of gray that also kind of works with the cast iron pillar. And so I thought, dang, this actually looks like it could have been from the same mod. So I tried not to go too overboard with this, but you can see we've already got something like 8 of this column because we have 4 on this side and 4 on the other side. And I don't know, I just think it looks really good, and we are probably going to have 6 to 8 more on the other side, depending upon what I do with the rest of the room. But I put those in, and then I started framing in the motors, and I put in these arches, which happened to contribute to the idea I had for the ceiling, which is we're going to go almost cathedral with it. The catch is, I can't go too high because we have to go into game mode, spectator. We have functional stuff from the world above. Now, on the left, we have the gantry elevator in the forge, and thankfully that's like 3 or 4 blocks high, and also, I'm not entirely sure, yeah, it's on the very edge, so we don't really need to worry about clearance there. We also have the water wheel from the sorting system, which is thankfully in the stairwell, and I've already dealt with that clearance issue. This is the cart breaker from the sorting system, and unfortunately, it is 2 blocks directly over the edge. So that means that any kind of arch has a 2-block clearance in, specifically this, I think it's the X position? Yeah. So I can't go too high here, but I can still do a lot with the rest of the space that we have. Let's come out of spectator real quick. Game mode creative. So after I figured out the column thing, I was left with an empty spot here with the brass casing, and I was left with a giant stone wall here that didn't look particularly great. I knew that I couldn't just leave it flat no matter what block choice I picked for it, and so I remembered 2 episodes ago when I built the portal, I mentioned embers pipes as well. And so I settled on the fluid pipe specifically, and we've once again used the technique where I have fluid transfers in the walls and ceiling to sort of act as brackets for the pipes itself. And I settled on the fluid pipe because it's a similar shade of gray to the chute, or at the very least, we can see pixels with the same elements of gray in both the fluid pipe and the chute. Again, this is just me eyeballing things. I'm not formally trained or anything like that, I just think it works. So, we had stone behind this originally, and I knew that I didn't just want to leave it stone either. So, after taking a look, I settled on crying obsidian for some reason, and I think part of that is because we have another portal down below. It's obsidian plus purple. And then, narratively, that kind of helps sell the fact that we're making an interdimensional portal below this. I don't know if you want to say that it's like fluid flowing into the system, or it's arcane energies leaking out of the system and into the surrounding environment, but I think this just helps that a little bit. And then color-wise, I realized after staring at this for a little bit, the nether bricks, is that it's almost kind of a wine red, I think, and so that means that it's got a higher blue content than you would think. And that means that it's almost in the same family as purple. I mean, not like the exact same family. Obviously, this is purple, and this is like red purple, but I think that that's kind of what drew my eye to it, is that this stands out, but not too much. It works with the surrounding environment. And then, happy coincidence, I was taking a look at the factory blocks from chiseled chipped integration, or maybe I've got that backwards, chipped chisel integration, potato tomato, and I came across this purple gold lined, I don't remember what the exact block name is, but it's the factory block, and it's specifically the purple lined variant, and it's like a dark enough color, but also has that similar kind of shade of wine red that I thought, this is it. This is like practically perfect. It's dark enough that it doesn't draw too much attention, especially away from the accent color that we've got going on here, but it also looks like it fits. And so that's what I used up there, and then I used it a little bit there, and I also used it here, and well, I'm probably going to end up putting some in here below the storage as well, but I'm not 100% sold on that. Some refactoring might end up happening in survival mode. So once I was done with that wall, you'll notice that I've got a belt here now. Well, before I put the belt in, I also did not have these cogs here. I started with the lower left corner by sheer coincidence, and what I originally intended to do was take a shaft out, and we'd spin this cogwheel, I want to say anti-clockwise, so that we'd have another large cogwheel here that would spin clockwise when this is descending. Kind of a similar effect to the gate that we have upstairs on the server. Except it didn't look as good as the gate did on the server because I, wasn't meshing with chains, I was meshing with a physical basalt door, and it just didn't look as good because we didn't have anything that it looked like the gear could interact with here. So, and let me distract myself by saying the way that we're getting the shaft out from here is that underneath the gearbox here, we have 2 more gearboxes, and this is necessary because we need the double reversal before we get to the gantry shaft in order to make it turn the original direction. So, we're taking power out from here for purely aesthetic purposes, and then I decided, okay, well, if I'm not going to have the gear turning into the door for aesthetic purposes, let's daisy chain a couple of gears down in this direction, and sheer happy coincidence, this cogwheel happens to sit perfectly within these nether brick stairs and the vertical stairs that I've got here, and it almost looks like I've intentionally framed it like that. And so, happy little accidents, Bob Ross that sauce. And then I decided, well, okay, if I can't have a gear going into the build, let's experiment with putting another cogwheel here. And the thing is, I was worried about it connecting to the gantry carriage, so what I did was I opened the door, placed in the cogwheel, and then encased it in brass, so on the back of this, the shaft is not exposed, and therefore there's no risk of accidentally turning the gantry carriage, and then potentially preventing this entire mechanism from opening. So then once I did that, I did the upper right corner, which is where we get our variance, and I think the additional asymmetry, including the rotational factor, has really helped out with this. So originally I had the same sort of reverse Mickey Mouse, where we have big ears and a small body, and I did the same thing here, large cog, small cog. Large cog was originally here, and then I thought to myself, oh, right, the brass casing. It looks weird just as exposed brass casing, at least from the front it does. From the underside, it doesn't matter so much because this is, framing in the door. That looks perfectly fine with empty space here. But from the front, it looked sort of bare. So originally, I came out from that large cogwheel that we had here, and I placed in the belt, and it looked even stranger with the air gap in front of the brass. It just didn't seem to work for me. So I activated my secret HTML developer brain, and I said, what happens if we change the Z index on this? So we literally moved this one Z block in this direction to the south. And yeah, I think that just worked out a lot better. So instead of having the cogwheel coming out of the small cogwheel in the diagonal direction, we came out in front of it with another large cogwheel, and then we took a small cogwheel so that we are also speeding this belt up, which means that visually it is also another movement component that is not running at the same speed as everything else, and I think that helps add to the animation because it breaks up the sameness. It breaks up the fact that the gears are mostly turning the same speeds as each other. And when we get to next week's video, we're going to see that in action, and it's going to look pretty dang cool. Now finally, let's see, I think after all of that, the storage was almost the last thing that I built. So I put in the storage, and then I thought, okay, well, if we've got the framed blocks as sort of our framework, like we have over the motor here, let's go ahead and put in some more slopes here and give it a little bit more shape in the drawer section rather than just being another flat wall. And then I picked dark oak, stripped dark oak specifically, because I thought that looked closest to the rest of the mangrove lining, rather than just using mangrove that is not stripped as the accent. This seems to work very well. It almost looks like it's just part of the game, if you ask me. But I believe that's all the topics I wanted to cover in this week's video, so I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, be sure to like, subscribe, click that bell to be notified, and as always, I'm looking forward to your feedback in the comments below. And with that, I will catch you on the flip side. Thanks for watching, everybody! In the upper left is the next video in the series, or a video you might like. In the lower left is the series playlist, and on the right is my icon by which you can subscribe. Thanks again for watching!